What's up, y'all, and welcome to the channel. I'm Mallory Davis, and today we're going to be talking about star trail photography. How do you do it? What gear do you need? And then lastly, how do you bring it all together in post-processing? Stick around. Star trails, we're able to capture them because essentially all the stars in the sky rotate, if you're on the northern hemisphere, around the North Pole or Polaris. The other awesome thing that I love about star trails is you're not limited to doing them in extremely dark locations. You can actually do star trail imaging in heavily light polluted areas such as major cities or neighborhoods where there's harsh street lights that can otherwise ruin Milky Way shots. First and foremost, we want a sturdy tripod. The idea is you want to set your camera up, start an interval, and essentially not touch it for the remainder of your shooting process. The next obvious piece of gear, you're going to want a camera, and this camera ideally will shoot in manual mode. It could be a DSLR or a mirrorless camera that can take manual exposures. Depending on the shot you're looking for, the next piece of advice is going to be a lens. So if you shoot with a nice wide angle lens, and I'm talking anywhere from 14 millimeters to 24 millimeters, you're able to capture a lot of the sky, so thus including more star trails in your scene. However, feel free to experiment. Go anywhere from 50 to 70 to heck, even 100, whatever tickles your fancy. And the last, and I would argue, besides the camera, most important piece of gear that you're going to need is actually a plan. And I say a plan because it's important to know what the weather conditions are like, what the status of the moon is like, and lastly, understanding what the output of all your image is going to look like, or based on where your focal point is, what are your trails going to actually come out in post-processing. We've got our gear all situated. Now, how do you actually go out and shoot star trails? So there's actually two methods to shooting star trail images. The first being you set your camera to bulb and you essentially leave your camera on one single exposure for minutes or hours at a time. That is not my preferred method. There are a whole host of things that could go wrong that could ruin your shot. So what I recommend is taking shorter exposures, anywhere from 20 to 30 seconds long, and then we'll stack them in post. And this actually gives you the ability to a couple of things. Catch some really interesting things in the sky. So whether it be satellites or shooting stars, you're able to have that single frame that you can pull out for detail later on. But you can also make time-lapse videos, which who doesn't love an awesome time-lapse? So again, shooting those shorter exposures offers you a lot of flexibility in post. The next thing to consider when out shooting is actually focusing your camera. So because it will be pitch black, you'll need to focus in manual focus. So here's a quick video on how to do that.
With other lenses, like this Sony 14mm G Master, you've got a focus ring that will continuously spin, and you don't have that hard infinity stop. So for this, we're gonna zoom in on our largest star, and then we use this focus line down here. So as we slide to the right, you see that is infinity. However, that is not sharp. So now becomes the delicate balance of once the star gets nice and small, and as you focus out towards a shorter focal distance, you see it get bigger again. Now you know, let's rock back towards infinity and wait for it to become as pinpoint as possible. And make those motions a little bit smaller until you feel good with your focus point.
For the remainder of your camera settings, it actually really depends on where you are. If you're in a heavily light polluted area, I would recommend stopping your f-stop down to anywhere from, if you're on a f2.8 to maybe f4. If you're in a very, very dark area where there's little light pollution, I would recommend going down to f2.8 to let in as much light as possible. As for the ISO, this is where some of your creative intuitions can come into play. I prefer preserving a lot of the natural color that comes from stars. And so in order to do this, you need to keep your ISO on the lower end of things, because you gotta think, if your ISO is getting much higher, you're allowing more light to come in, and thus you're overexposing and blowing out some of that color that you can otherwise retain in the stars. So for me, I prefer to keep my ISO anywhere from 800 to 1600, again, depending on the location. And lastly, in terms of shutter speed, again, this can depend on your location. I'd prefer to start anywhere from 20 to 30 seconds long. And my goal is to have sharp stars. Again, if I happen to have an awesome shooting star or an iridium flare or something happen in a single frame, it's awesome to be able to have those crisp, nice stars rather than short, trailing, out of focus images. Be sure to take some test shots wherever your location may be, but ultimately these settings should be great to get you started. So you've got your settings dialed in, your camera's locked in on your tripod, now what? Most cameras these days have an intervalometer built into their menu system. However, if you don't, I would highly recommend picking up an intervalometer or a shutter cable release like this off Amazon. They're super cheap and will allow you to be hands-free and enjoy the night sky and not have to be manually pushing your shutter all night long. Another quick tip, be sure that in your camera settings you have turned off long exposure noise reduction. What this essentially is doing is if you're taking a 20-second exposure, the camera is then automatically taking another 20-second exposure of a dark frame that then averages out the noise. So 20 plus 20, that's 40 seconds per shot. Absolutely eats up an evening and will actually mess up your intervals for your star trails. The goal is you want your interval between each shot to be 1 second. So be sure to turn long exposure noise reduction off. And then lastly, how many shots do you need? Well, ultimately it comes down to how much time do you have, how much battery do you have, and how much memory card space do you have available. You can essentially leave your camera running all night long for really long, dramatic star trails like this. Or you can even create some really nice look with shorter trails with images like this. I recently just got back from a trip from Big Bend National Park, which is in the southwest corner of Texas and boasts some of the darkest skies in the Northern Hemisphere. While I was there, I went on a night hike in the middle of nowhere with some friends, and we set up for astrophotography. I actually had 2 cameras running. One was focused on the core of the Milky Way, while another was focused on capturing these star trails. So in this selection, I have 600 images. Next, what we need to do is, leaving all of our images highlighted, we're gonna right-click, export. I'm gonna choose a new folder on my desktop, and we're gonna call it Grapevine Star Trails. So you wanna create this, and then one important thing to note is to make sure when you export, to export them as TIFF files. So what this is gonna allow us to do is, after the stack is complete, we can still go in and make a lot of those really critical color balance and shadow detail highlights without baking in all of the adjustments as a JPEG. So everything else we want to leave unchecked. We don't want to resize, we don't want to sharpen, any of that good stuff. So at this point we push export, and depending on the speed of your computer, this could take a minute. All right, we've exported our 600 images, so now we open up our free software, StarStax. Can't recommend this enough. I've used it for years and really, really love the results that this gives me as opposed to stacking in, say, Photoshop. So all you need to do is come up here to this file folder, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna select our folder we just created. So this was my Grapevine Star Trail, and you're gonna select all those images and push open. So then it drops all of your images here. So important to note is we do want to turn on gap filling. So because our camera was running on an intervalometer, and I had 1 second in between. There will be a slight space between all of the images. So what this software does is it seamlessly blends all the stars together so it's not super jaggedy. Now, comet mode, you can really create some beautiful images with unique shooting star-like looks by using comet mode. And so for me, I'm gonna leave subtract dark images off because I don't have any dark frames for this image set. And now at this point, we process. So all you have to do is come over here to this button and away we go. Just like that, your image is beautifully stacked. So one more quick thing before we export this and take it back into Lightroom. We want to finish the gap filling process. And so what you want to do over here is turn on Show Threshold Overlay. Now, what this is saying is how much of the image is receiving that gap filling. So essentially we would just want to drag our slider to the right until mostly only the stars are selected. Looking good. And it's okay if you have some, but in essence, you really want it to stay just the stars. So now what I'm gonna do is zoom in and figure out the amount of gap filling to do, because if you slide all the way to the right, I'm gonna turn this off. You see it really starts to blow out the image and introduce some jagged edges to our trails. However, if you bring it back to the left, you see it's much smoother. So if we zoom out just a little bit, I think something about there looks great. Again, there's only pretty much 4 buttons you need to think about here. We go back to the save. And one trick I didn't learn until just recently is if you scroll all the way to the right in your save module, it defaults to, sorry about that, it defaults to JPEG. However, we want to keep this as a TIFF. So all we have to do is delete the JPEG and add .tiff. So be sure you change that so you have much more flexibility when you pull it back into Lightroom. So straight away, I'm gonna turn on my clipping again and I go into my highlights of the stars, and actually we're not super blown out. So what I'm gonna do is bring my highlights down. I'm gonna bring the exposure down just a bit. Bump the contrast. I'm gonna hold Option for my whites and drag this up. So boop, there you see they start to peak. I'm going to bring my blacks down, and there you have it. Just a super simple, quick edit and demonstration of how you can go out with very simple gear, capture as many images as your heart desires, use a free software with star stacks, and create awesome star trail images. I hope this video was super helpful just to get you started or refresh your star trail journeys. If you love shooting star trails like me, pop a comment down below. If you could do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, that would be awesome. It lets me know that you enjoyed this video and want me to continue creating content like this. But in the meantime, I wish you all the best. I wish you clear skies. I wish you happy shooting, happy printing, all of the above. We'll catch you next time.